Hello, solo of the month and flute friends near and far. Welcome to our December meeting and group practice. This month, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. Since we're playing a piece of music by a living composer, we have the opportunity to meet with him today. And I'd like to have everybody welcome our dear friend to the flute community, Daniel Dorff. Hello, Daniel. How are you?
It's great to see everybody, and thank you, Matt, for creating this, and thank you, everybody, for participating.
Well, and thank you for writing such a great piece of music. So this month we're playing the Nocturne on "It Came Upon the Midnight Clear" from the Nocturnes for the Nativity, and there's four Nocturnes in that. And Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about this piece as an overall work?
Um, sure. It was, I think, this either the second or third of the pieces that I did. Those of you who downloaded the three-page set from the Presser website, probably read the story of how all this came about. It was originally just the first one, and the others came back by popular demand. And the book came out right before COVID. So the first COVID Christmas when nobody could play together, this book was new. And it's a sad way to have something good happen in a way, but for the book, it gave the book an opportunity to get noticed, which is, I, you know, people have to like it to keep playing it. But not the Nocturne on It Came Upon the Midnight Clear, I think was the most fun for me to write. And the way that I went about choosing each of the melodies started with which melody do I like the most in itself, which is why Cantique de Noël is where I started. That's very long and it's easy to write a concert piece based on it because the melody itself is so continuous and beautiful. Most hymns are shorter and not as elegant is the wrong word. They're more straightforward because they're meant to express the words. This one, It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. The melody was written by an American who had studied with Mendelssohn, and you can really hear it. If you know a lot of Mendelssohn melodies, you might not assume this just listening, but it might click that it's somebody who writes that kind of lilt and a melody that can stand on its own. It doesn't need to be part of the wording of a hymn and the Christmas meaning. So when I started to write this one, and I think part of why I said it's my favorite, I looked at it and I said, okay, like many melodies, it has a really clearly delineated ABA kind of form. And as you've been working on it, and also because you already knew the melody, but when you're working on playing it, things can become more obvious that you're used to. So if you're looking at the music or if you know it inside out by now, it starts with the famous theme, the opening for 8 bars, and then there's a contrasting phrase at bar nine, and bum bum ba da 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 da. Sort of the same rhythm, sort of the same kind of shape, but suddenly it's using a minor key relationship to what the melody started with. You have the E natural and the F sharp that leads to the G that makes it sound like, okay, now we're focused in on the G. It's not in the key of B flat anymore. And in order to exaggerate the contrast, that's why in bar eight, there's a little hairpin going down to taper out. It makes nice phrasing to close. This is something that we work on as wind players. How do you end a phrase with a beautiful taper out sometimes? And also, when you taper out, that means it's that much more effective to do a forte subito right after, because there'll be the biggest of contrasts if you're as quiet as you can get, and then you play forte subito. So I forget what the words are to the hymn, but when you get to this middle section in bar nine, it can really be strongly contrasted. And then after 4 bars, that tapers down until at bar 13 it goes back to the opening melody, which is the real standard ABA type of way to write a song or a melody. And the dynamics go down a little bit. So that took care of the basic statement of the melody. It's all really traditional Richard Willis, everybody's favorite hymn melody, straightforward. And most of these in this book, like any other verse anthem, reintroduce at the beginning, they state what the familiar theme is, and then it repeats with different variations on it afterwards. The next section is very much like a traditional theme and variations because it takes the same thing as the theme, but it uses some rhythm and some ornamentation and other kinds of being a little decorative and twisty to play through it now with a variation. Bum ba da 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 da. I had always until today thought I had taken that from Brahms, and maybe I did, because the clarinet sonata has rhythms like that, and so do a lot. But when I read today that Richard Willis had studied with Mendelssohn, I thought, if any of you know the Fourth Symphony of Mendelssohn, it's got a scherzo for oboes that sounds a little bit like Clementine. A few of his pieces do, but da 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 is the rhythm. So this can sound very grazioso, very scherzo-like and lighthearted, and all these E naturals. Because when you're in playing this melody in the key of B flat, look how many Fs there are in the first line of the whole piece. It goes to the fifth note of the scale a lot. That's sort of like the home base to spring back in different directions. And so here there's a lot of E naturals always preceding that F. And that's what makes it sound sort of elegant and cute. In music theory, there's all kinds of words for this, like escape tone or leading tone or passing tone or chromatic this and that. Whatever you want to call it, it's a neighboring note that just sort of paves the way to get there. So it just doesn't sound repetitive, repetitive, repetitive. It's like adding a little decoration to the note that you're heading for. And by having it be that E, I started to think, you know what? I didn't realize it, but this variation might be based on that Cole Porter song called True Love. Bum 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 ba da da dum ba dum. It's that same note, that same leading tone up to the fifth degree of the scale. If you know the Cole Porter song, you may never hear this again the same way as, or you might have even noticed it before. I'm sure there are so many other pieces like that. So at any rate, that's what got this section of it going. This, like we could call it variation number one, the part that starts at bar 18.
And as flute players, those descending leaps, many of those low E naturals are preceded by an upper
Mhm.
a leap from above. As flute players, we generally have to like push a little bit stronger air in order to get those low notes to speak. So is it appropriate for those E naturals, those leading tones, or whatever we're going to call them, to be a little bit stronger to go to the F?
Is it appropriate is a really big leading question because I think it's appropriate to do whatever you like.
Okay.
The things I'm talking about are ways to maybe help you understand what makes the music tick or what you might want to express, or where you can do things that are not exactly the way they're written on the page. And no, I mean, I wrote this for you to play. And I don't always do that with every piece, but yeah, sort of I do that. I'm not writing for my composition teacher or for my composition friends. I write flute music for flute players to play. Like I feel happy when people want to play it. And so if something is awkward and there's an easy workaround, take the workaround. People do this with Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart, and there are arguments about how to perform it. With any great piece, not everybody plays it the same way, including all of your favorite performers. So give yourself the same license. It's about the spirit of the piece and the joy that you will bring not only to yourself, but I gather some of you have been playing this for friends or planning to play it when it gets closer to actual Christmas. And think about what you convey when, it's a beautiful song and you're sharing your talent with your friends and family. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you said it's a piece to share with your friends and family because
Mhm.
our kind of goal in solo of the month is to seek connection.
Mhm.
And so this is a great piece with which we can do that.
Yeah, and Christmas music is, for people who are not professional musicians on stage a lot,
Hmm.
Christmas is a great time to have people together and have extra opportunities to do that, where
Absolutely.
where you'll have gatherings and so on. So getting back to the difference in similarity between the main theme section and this variation from 18, this one starts forte, whereas the other one was quiet, loud, quiet. This one starts forte, and then when we get to that middle section where it flirts with being in G minor, like to pick up to 26, now there's a piano subito, so it's exactly the opposite. This one's going loud, quiet, loud, whereas the other was going quiet, loud, quiet. So in writing it, I saw that as a way to do the same kind of ABA format with the loudness level without being too repetitive. And so this is one of the things composers either think about or subconsciously they're doing it without even calculating. That here are some things that are there's this term organic to the piece, which I think is really a good metaphor that little cells are like motives in music, and they're like DNA in living things. There are these teeny little patterns that you'll find all throughout a piece. And if you look at any piece that you're familiar with, you'll see that you couldn't just, jump or cut into some other piece of music and keep playing, even by the same composer. That there's a motivic unity, just like when there's a story, the characters, the motivations of the characters, the location, and so on, is a continuity that allows things to travel and still make sense. And so that is always going on in music. And it's one of the things that we learn to do when we're trying to write pieces that are 30 minutes long after we got used to writing pieces that are 32 bars long. How do you maintain it over time? So, getting back to this variation now, the middle of the piece, it gets quiet for the middle section at 26. The notes are pretty much the same as the first time through, other than the ornamentation. And then it crescendos back to forte in bar 30, where we go back to basically where it started at bar 18. It meaning where this variation started. So 30 is like the closing answer to 18, just the way that we had bar 13 being like the closing denouement answer or whatever to the first part of the piece. Now, what do we do? We've gone two times and something has to be different. I don't want to say it's a rule there's a principle of psychology that composers know and joke tellers know. How many jokes do you know that start out with, there were three guys or, three whatever? And the reason why this is that the first time it happens, it's exposing a pattern, a behavior, or a thing. The second time it happens, it's confirming this is what we're talking, this is what the pattern is. It happened twice and so the third time has to be a surprise. The third time, if it's ironic, if it's what you didn't expect, that's often what a lot of jokes are based on. And if you think about music, ba 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 bum, ba 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 bum, Beethoven was going to do it the third time exactly the same. The third time it has to go ba 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 ba, like, and it gets carried away. Beethoven does that so much. So do all the other composers, not always as obviously, but you set up a pattern, it makes it more dramatic to do a variation of the pattern. So what am I going to do the third time when we get to bar 36? First, I knew I wanted to change the key. So that's why there's this little transition before 36. It would be a little too square to just go 16 bars, 16 bars, 16 bars. So I made this little sparkle based on the end of 33, where that ended. I took that little motive and kept going to change the key into G major, which is related to G minor, which we've been hinting at. But now we actually get there and stay, except now it's in major. And I thought, there's a sound that is always sounds so cool on flutes, and it's great for variations. If you ever study like in the 19th century and early 20th century, there were so many pieces that were variations for any solo instrument on opera themes. I think that Taffanel wrote a whole bunch. Matt, you and some of the others in the meeting, I'm sure know a bunch of these. I think Taffanel's Italian opera fantasies are like that. And they're variations on a melody. So it's a really handy way to approach it. So I thought, well, I want to write the kind of thing where you have the illusion of two different parts, where there's an upper voice, an upper musical line, that's the melody itself, and a lower line that's really ornately dancing around, and they intersect in a way that one person can play it. Bach sort of does this in the solo partita and lots of other music. He wrote for violin and cello all the time, but when he wrote for flute, he could create that. The Telemann fantasias are similar, not maybe as intense as Bach. And certainly Carl Gaillard, if any of you have worked on the music of Carl Gaillard, he has this with the stems up and stems down at the same time too. So how do you play it? First, let's look at what the composer did here. As before, now we're in G, but it's the same 8-bar opening of the regular melodic phrase, which has this challenging kind of texture, and it's still piano left over from previously. So we're playing it quietly, which can make it sparkle also, which spumante, the first time I ever saw that on music, it was in a summer camp band, and everybody was just laughing, 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 because even though we were all minors, we all knew that was champagne. Mom and dad had Asti every New Year's and so on. And it was in a set of variations for band by Norman Della Gioia when the conductor said, just chill a little bit. It's the Italian word for bubbling, which is why champagne is often called spumante, or Italian champagne is called spumante. I think there's a word spume, like referring to the bubbles in the sea, maybe in British poetry. I think I've seen it. So spumante is just bubbly, which is a perfect description for the way this sounds. So we've got the opening 8 bars of the main regular part of this section doing that. And then the cantabile. So here now, same thing. There's a big contrast for the middle section where it goes into minor and it has this middle kind of melody in between. Here it just becomes straightforward, beautiful melodic without any of the fancy stuff. And so that's how it contrasts the most. And then the ending of it to have a nice, peaceful ending and to fit on one page very conveniently. It goes back to the melody and it stays melodic, but it's not the way that it's not either the way the melody was first introduced or the way that this section started. It actually goes back to the way the first variation started, that grazioso Brahms or Mendelssohn kind of melody. And when it gets to the end, there's no big coda. It's just one little extra high G. So how do you play this at bar 36? I'm sort of guessing that's been one of the questions that has come up. I wrote something like this. I have a piece called Trees, which is based on the famous poem that I know from the Little Rascals. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. It's for a flutist who can also be the narrator, or you can have someone else narrate it. But at one point, I wanted to have the daintiness, the energy, the daintiness. So I did this. And it's fascinating to listen to how differently people play it because we know that it's supposed to project the top note as being long and melodic. But how do you do that if you're also playing 16th notes? I don't have an answer for that other than that it's fascinating to listen to Ron Paul and Galway and all of your favorite more contemporary performers play, for instance, the Kagler or Bach. And to me, the only answer is to know that you can't do it literally. That this is, and Gary Schocker writes a lot of these too. Listen to how he plays it. He's not playing two things at the same time. It's creating the illusion of like, I just I don't know if it's possible to see it's not possible to see it. I wrote two lines that sort of straight lines that go like this, so that it looks like one is all the way straight up and down and the other is all the way straight across, but they're not touching. It creates an illusion that both lines are going. Matt, you're the teacher. I'm going to ask you to explain better than I did. How do you do it?
Sure. And yeah, this is so common in virtuosic flute playing.
Mhm.
And I'm so glad that we flute players oftentimes study many of the cello preludes that Bach wrote. And we also have Bem, who, was the designer of the modern flute, who wrote some really great theme and variation pieces that are pretty common for us. So this is something that we need to do very often. And there's a couple of ways that we can highlight notes. One is to do it with a dynamic contrast, which can be sometimes forceful, but if it's done well, that can be delightful. One can be to add shimmers of vibrato on the melody notes, which is one of my preferred ways to do that in this particular theme. And another really accessible way would be to do an articulation variation, where we do a slightly more tenuto articulation on the melody notes and more staccato articulation on the accompanying notes, like do da 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 do da do da do da do da do da 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 do da do ba da do do da da do. So we're hearing a little bit more length, a little bit more tone to those melody notes. And we have a group full of amazing flutists out there, besides the three that I mentioned. And again, for me, those last two would be my preferred personal methods of changing the articulation and adding a little vibrato. Anybody else out there also have a way of highlighting those melody notes that
I
you
don't have a
like?
way of highlighting the melody, but I think that the double, or I want to just add that the speed of this makes it, I found it difficult to do because of the speed. I was trying the articulation method, uh, kind of what you were demonstrating with sounds. I did find the speed difficult with that. Um, just
Yeah.
I wanted to add that. That's
As
all.
an unaccompanied piece, you probably have a bit of flexibility with that tempo. But I understand that with the spumante, and the most recent tempo indicator of the score is 63 for the dotted chord note. So it could be challenging. But again, like we talk about keeping each of our boxes balanced, it might be worth practicing doing the articulation variation without worrying about the melody. Just do da, 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 do da, do, and separating the articulation using the um, articulation as an expressive element from the melodic thing as you get comfortable with that skill. Because so often, once we start double tonguing or multiple tonguing or whatever articulation pattern is, once we start, we kind of just get in we're like a train that just keeps going. Like once we start doing short articulation, it's hard to convince ourselves to do some variety. So Daniel, if it's simply just the articulation, then maybe practice that as its own element.
So another thought related to what Matt was saying is there's no reason that this has to be played perfectly metronomically. That I would say that pretty much about anything when you're not in a competition or an audition. And most teachers will say that once you're able to play it perfectly metronomically, to then loosen up because you're telling a story to your listeners. It's not doing figure eights on the skating rink. It's now that I have the skill, what am I going to do with it? I'm going to play this for my family Christmas party to make everybody not pat me on the head because I'm so wonderful, but to say it was so great to be part of that experience and share that with you. So whenever there's a long note, if you delay the tempo a little bit, bum 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 bum. Maybe not as exaggerated as I just did, but when it's subtle like that, it can create the feel of it spilling over while you also have this little wiggly staccato-y stuff.
And that goes so nicely with just the concept of rubato, where even if you
Hmm.
are wanting to have the overall phrase fit within a certain amount of time, you can, like the B natural has, it looks like the melody note is a quarter note. And so if you were to want the B natural to be slightly longer, then you could make the couple of sixteenths that followed a little bit more condensed to help to fit that if you are practicing that style with a metronome. But this, especially since it's short phrases in this section, it's kind of like little two measure phrases. There's plenty of time for you to catch up with the breath and stuff like that, and be, I don't know. When I played this, I played this afternoon, and I was very dramatic with this section, and took a little extra time in the breaths because it was so much drama going on with those little sparkly bubbles that we have in the spumante section.
And it's more interesting, when I do master classes of regular pieces of mine, which is really the same as this. There's a metaphor I like to make about, especially with unaccompanied pieces, when it won't be a problem if you get slightly off of a theoretical grid, that great orators, actors, excuse me, they have the script, they know the words, but the pacing of it, the phrasing of it is what separates, I don't want to say good from bad. It could separate what's very good to what's extraordinary.
Right.
And the way that, in the context, because the way that you would read, it is now 70 degrees out and we're expecting showers in 2 hours. The way that they say the weather is different from a Shakespearean soliloquy. To be or not to be. And sometimes I'll ask students to flip-flop that. Read the weather as if it were a Shakespearean soliloquy and vice versa, and say that, it seems like we're having fun, that's a joke, but think about why. Why does it sound so wrong? It's what's appropriate for the occasion. So if you're playing a Baroque piece and the continuo is going, if you're depending on where you are, if you're a soloist, maybe you do want to get a little bit off occasionally. The whole uh, Italian opera, the whole bel canto school was all about that. And Chopin's right hand, people talk about. The left hand had to be rigid, and the right hand could then be rubato against yourself, which I could not ever do. But I know what they're talking about, like to imitate the great singers. And when you listen to popular music, it's certainly like that.
Right.
Until about 15 or 20 years ago, when everybody is singing with a click track and getting auto-corrected and quantized, and it's sterile. I mean, I feel that way. Some people do or don't, but if it's not techno dance music, it's just sterilizing the personal feel of it.
Yeah, and there's so many ways that one could sing this phrase too,
Hmm.
and so if you were to think of all those ways, then you can apply that even with the spumante section where you have the
Hmm.
virtuosity going on as well. So speeding up the same notes of the melody or slowing it down. And Daniel, you've probably done this with me before, where I'll oftentimes have students play the melody note as an individually melody, and then
Hmm.
add in all of the other and record themselves doing it, and
Hmm.
then record them and then play back with the recording of themselves playing the melody, adding in all the other notes. So that way, intonation, which is tricky when we have large intervals like this, we're still matching those centered pitches, but then we're placing it within the phrase where we want it to be.
So I don't have a recording of Ron Paul playing this, but um, if you were really curious, there's, I think, 15 or 20 different people have YouTubes of this movement. And there are several people who have more than one performance of it. And it'd be interesting to hear how they play it. I haven't listened to their performances with this in mind in specific, but I think I'm going to have to tonight because I'm making myself curious. How did they get away with it?
Well, I'm hoping you'll have up to 3,000 more recordings of this piece on YouTube before too long. So,
I know that there are several up there on Facebook and Instagram.
yeah, it's great. Um, yeah,
Questions about anything? I mean, I don't know your format for this. I'm here.
Um, I'm interested, if I can speak, about your process. In terms of the structure, did you say can you explain your process for this? Did you map out a structure and then add the elements to it? The structure being, I'm going to do X number of variations and they might be this way, or just talk to me about how you go about
Yeah.
making a piece like this.
So it's a great. Oh, somebody's echoing loud. Yeah, thanks. Um, for this piece, well, really for all four of these, more than when I'm writing my own pure kind of music, which is also thinking about form and not sticking with it as I go, just, a certain balance between those two things. Since it's variations on an existing theme, I knew what the theme was. And I absolutely knew what I was saying at the first part of the session, that the theme has a melodic phrase that's done twice, and then it has a contrasting phrase, and then it comes back more or less to the first phrase with a little bit more closure. So I knew that I was going to first make a setting straightforward like that, and then do a few more different variants of that and see where it led. And I know that's the way I approached it. I don't remember exactly the way that the work process unfolded. Um, I'm gonna guess that probably I had an idea for the Grazioso variation and then messed around with it. And when you already have the theme like this, it can be pretty fast to write that whole section once you know what's going to be sort of the guiding motive. If you listen to a Beethoven or Brahms or Mozart variations, they state the theme and then they'll do it in triplets, or maybe they'll do it in minor, or there'll be one guiding motive what this variation is about. And for any kind of music, Charles Ives variations on America, here's one that sounds like it's a merengue, and here's a variation that sounds all the pedal is doing it. So coming up with the idea for each of these variations was the most important part. And then fleshing it out, I wouldn't say it took care of itself, because sometimes it's tricky. There are questions: how do I do it? How do I pace? Um, for instance, I'm just looking at the second half of bar 37. Give your tongue a break, and give the ears a break, that it relaxes. It isn't completely. There was something, Zartamburi and Ibi did an edition. She's a piccoloist from the Seattle Symphony. She did an edition of the Vivaldi piccolo concertos. And in her preface, she says, Vivaldi is not a sewing machine, which I thought was not only a great metaphor, but it demands explanation. Because I think what she was addressing is that that kind of Baroque music, you might have a page that's straight through 16th notes. And especially in a concerto, how do you play it accurately if you don't make it sound like that? One way is if the composer um, gives you contrast. So I wanted to balance, there are a few triplets in this section, and sometimes it will go up or down. Sometimes there'll be different types of neighboring notes. But basically, once I had the idea for bar 36, then the next section took care of itself. So it was definitely written in chunks or written in phrases. Maybe I said when I got to 44, okay, I'm going to make this whole phrase be a sort of normal texture. It wasn't going note by note, which is easier to do in this kind of traditional music than it can be in something more abstract
How
or
does it
not based
compare?
on something.
How
Yeah.
does it compare to your original compositions or compositions where you're not working with the theme that's already been provided?
This was easier to write because there was a framework, you might say. And there was a function, there was a framework, and there are expectations that it will stay coherent, and that it's more for function than artistic exploration, you might say.
Hmm.
It's an interesting question because, when you hear Aaron Copland's setting of folk songs, they sound like Copland and they sound like folk songs.
Right.
I think part of that is because he keeps the melody of the folk song, but the piano parts might sound like his orchestra music. It's it's a really interesting thing,
Hmm.
that question.
What you have a lot of music for flute. Do you have any idea of how many pieces you have for flute or that feature flute? I guess.
I knew you were going to ask, and that's why I have this. And so I didn't count, and sometimes they overlap, but it's 40-ish. And the funny thing and the reason why I know off the top of my head is pretty much every February I exhibit at the Mid-Atlantic Flute Convention outside of DC. And I have display racks that are like a cascade that have six pockets in it. And little by little, I've been having to add a cascade every few. Now I have seven cascades, which means putting 42 slots that have music in it. But sometimes I'll have like a new piece that's not available yet, or um, something that's, I mean, a lot of them are flute and clarinet duets or wind quintet. They're not all solo flute, but
What makes you write for flute so much? Is it the instrument? Because you're not a flutist, you're a clarinetist. Is that correct?
correct.
Is
Yeah.
it the flute itself, or is it the people who play the flute that inspire you to write so much great music for it?
I think they're very interrelated, and also interrelated is specific flute players who are commissioning works. But it's not as simple as somebody says, I want to commission you, and I say, okay, and that's what I'm doing the rest of the year. I mean, to some extent, but sometimes I say, no, that idea doesn't interest me, or more often I'll say, yeah, but I'm backed up for 2 years, and if you need it for your senior recital, there's no way I'd be able to have it ready for you. Um, on a related note, right now, since you didn't ask me, so what are you writing now? Because that's always a question. I'm in the middle of writing a flute choir piece for the Slippery Rock flute department. It's called Miles from Home, and that name could mean so many different things that I'm making sure that I don't start thinking it means any one thing. Um, it's two movements that I'm pretty much done with the first, which is sort of stately and dreamy and creepy and Miles Davisy, sort of all in one. And the fact that I can't find an adjective for it makes me feel good that maybe I'm doing something that won't sound like everything else. If it's some kind of amalgam of feelings. And then the rest of it will be fast. So it will be done sometime during the 26-27 season at Slippery Rock, and then available after they get through their premiere of it.
And Cassandra is so inspiring in her own right that it's probably is her playing or her teaching inspiring elements of that piece too, or is it completely inspired by just the mood or the tone of the piece?
It's hard to say. I mean, one of the first things I thought is, okay, I've written one piece for flute choir called Fireworks. I don't want this to sound like that. And yet, I don't want to write a piece that uses the same sound qualities and use of something that has, this will be for 8 individual parts plus an optional contra doubling the bass. So I just started thinking, okay, what sounds good? What do I want to spend the next few months living with? And Cassandra will be conducting it. So, the inspiration involving her is she's performed a lot of my pieces, including with her young listeners, things that have nothing to do with flute. And I was previously commissioned by their clarinet department a few years ago. And when she and I saw each other last year at Mid-Atlantic, we both said, it's time, you know, to do this. So often the friendship can be part of the formula, but we discussed, okay, so I'll write a piece. What is it that you need? Where do we find an intersection? Um, I'm having trouble talking when microphones go on. So where do we intersect what you would want to play in your group and what you would come back several years later to play again and again? And how does that overlap with what I would want to write? And that's usually what happens for any commission. I have a commission coming up for somebody who wanted low flutes, was curious about effects pedals, and is absolutely completely into ecology and endangered species, particularly with the water. This is Marie Bennett, if any of you know her. And I said, well, that works perfectly because I'm just starting to explore effects pedals, and I'm the same way about nature. And, so we talked, like not even typing, we actually talked on a face to face and planned it out, which I know she's done with other composers. So I have a concept of what I'm going to do. And I recently finished just a simple, not simple, but a piece for C flute and piano, like no, that's the basic for I Goldsmith. And we talked about what kind of piece is she looking for. She wanted to commission this with excitement to christen her new instrument, which will be delivered in February. I won't name brands, but one of the major brands custom made it for her, and she's played the prototype, and she wanted something special because what she played, she was calling her magic flute. So she's waiting for her magic flute to arrive. And the first thing I had to come to terms with is, do I or do I not quote some Mozart themes from the magic flute? No spoilers here. You'll have to come hear it. Hopefully at NFA this summer.
Well, the brave are victorious, they say, or Mozart wrote in the Magic Flute at one point. So,
Oh, I didn't realize that. I was just thinking of, the little bum 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 bum, the Papageno theme.
Papageno, uh-huh.
Yeah. That pattern shows up elsewhere, like the Queen of the Night aria. But bum 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 bum.
It sure does.
I'm not saying that it's in the piece. No spoilers.
All right.
But the point being to answer that anything can be an inspiration, and also more seriously or generally, sometimes there are different kinds of inspiration. I write a lot of music about nature, animals, lakes, and sometimes I ask myself why, because I'm not someone who goes out hiking every weekend. I love nature. I love my friends' pets, but I don't have my own because I'm not responsible to devote the time that it would take. But I think that there's something otherworldly about it. Thinking that way sort of removes me from being at the office or being in traffic or reading the news or whatever. There's a dreamy otherworldliness about imagination.
You sure have a
I,
lot of music with nature and
yeah,
animals.
well,
The most recent premiere I heard of your piece was the Blue
Blue
Jacaranda,
Jacaranda, yeah,
um, and that was
which is about those
fantastic.
trees, yeah. Oh,
What
that's right. You were at the real premiere,
I was at the premiere,
the
yeah.
real premiere before NFA. Yeah. So,
Your Desert Dusk piece, I've heard that
mhm.
before. I think is it Tweet? Is that the a piccolo piece?
Tweet's the piccolo piece,
That's
which
such a popular piece among piccolo players, which I'll admit I am not. So much.
it's really hard. It,
Oh.
and if anybody here is thinking about learning it, a few people have said to me they learned it playing it on C flute because to avoid RSI problems, that there's so much intricate grace notes and all that that it's hard to do that for a sustained amount of time on pick. But if you learn what all the notes are, all the chords that are in the grace notes, and then move it over to piccolo, it goes faster.
That's great advice in general. I
Would
never
you like
knew.
a little known fact about that piece?
Of course.
Um, I forget what year it was. A few years after, well, so I was going to send it as a gift to Gudrun Hinze, who's a German flutist who I knew of. And then suddenly one day she wanted to surprise me that she had made a YouTube of it. But I sent her the music hoping that she would like it, not knowing that she was already working on it. And so her YouTube, I think, is the standard that everybody goes to. It's gotten over 600,000 views.
Wow.
And I think because it was in the early days of YouTube, and when I say views, I mean YouTube views. In the early days of YouTube, a lot of orchestration classes or other music appreciation classes were putting together playlists for a good sample of every instrument
Hmm.
and what it sounds like alone. And I have a feeling that it got on quite a lot of those playlists because it's a crazy amount of views. But the little known fact is that many of you probably know Two Set Violin. It's this comedy parody duo of two string players, and usually pretty nasty and foul and in bad taste, even though good humor. And there's one episode where they're making fun of what it's like to be in the orchestra, sitting near the second violins and the violas, making fun of them. And they say there's only one thing worse than that is sitting next to the piccolo. It makes my ears bleed. And they played like 10 or 15 seconds of Gudrun Hinz's recording of Tweet to illustrate the terror of sitting next to and so well over 1 million people have watched that video, but I don't feel like I can say, well, all the views of that recording, because it's being trashed, you know, by a great comedy team.
I know there's at least two hands up, Daniel
Yeah.
and then Ruth. Daniel, can we get your question first?
Sure. I would love to know what you like about the flute and what you might frustrate you about it or wish it were otherwise.
Wow.
Wow.
That's
I mean, so
the
you've written
second,
a lot
yeah,
for.
the second half of that, no one's ever asked me before. Um, One of the things that I think is the most special compared to other instruments is the agility that I pretty much never worry about, is this playable? Sometimes it can be awkward, and when I'm done with a piece, I'll ask somebody, do I need to change where this is slurred? Do you need to tongue this? Or is it better if you slur it then tongue it? We had a little example of that Matt was mentioning going from D2 to E natural 1, even in this piece. But compared to other instruments, everything plays itself. I mean, it's the flute players also, but the mechanism of the instrument and the fact that it's got lots of rich octaves in many different colors and so many shadings. And I'm mostly a clarinetist and saxophone before that. And when I hear flutists talking about different players and subtleties of expression, color, I'll hear people say, well, she played the notes right, but she didn't color the phrasing. And it took me a while to understand that. I've been to a bunch of Gary Schocker master classes where he illustrated that. And Matt, I'm sure you do this too. I've only been to one of your master classes. Um, but it's fascinating to hear. And, what you can do in front of a spectroscope where you see the different partials, the different, some people call it a partial package, I think. It's so flexible like that. And most instruments are not like that. As far as frustration, it's hard to say, but there's one kind of obstacle that really is unfair, which is I write a lot of clarinet chamber music. And sometimes flutists say, could you make a flute choir or a flute quartet version of this clarinet piece? Well, the clarinet pieces often take advantage of that instrument's ability to go boom when you get to the bottom low note, really loud and powerful. And the low C, on the flute doesn't do that the way that it would, on the bottom note on the clarinet. It's a beautiful note, but it's not a power kick in the butt kind of note. So that's not a frustration. That's just part of, what the instrument is used for. Writing for orchestra is really fascinating once you know the instruments really well, because every instrument has a personality. Prokofiev and Mahler and everyone else who ever wrote leitmotifs, Strauss and Wagner, they knew how to make the best out of this instrument is great for portraying this or that. And flutists have a love-hate often with portraying birds because it's such a natural thing to do, but you get tired after a while of it.
It can be
I
a
mean that,
cliche, yeah.
yeah, it is, and other instruments can make bird sounds, but I think that answers your question. I know we have more to get to.
I as a flute player who loves listening to clarinet, and you as a clarinetist, like if we could enter or as soft as a clarinet, or if we could decrescendo as soft as a clarinet, I think we could make so much more magic. Like that is such an amazing thing of clarinet. But you as a composer and arranger, you understand the instruments and their what they're really great at and what they're less great at before you start composing to avoid that frustration? Or are there times that you wish the flute player could do this like a clarinet or could do that like a cello or whatever it might be?
At this point, I'm almost 70 and I've been writing since high school. So it's like 50 years. So it's hard to say what's become second nature. I don't write a lot for brass or for strings. And I would love to. I get commissioned by woodwind players lots more than anything else. And well, I don't like that to dictate what my creative work comes out as. If that's where the performance opportunities are, I'm still dictating what I'm writing. And I love writing for flute and for clarinet and for other winds. And also, answering your previous question about where I said there's over 40, it's an even mix between flute alone, combinations of flutes, flute with piano, flute with other instruments. I have a real allergy to sort of writing for the same medium over and over again. I think I would get stale. And at one point, I said I can never write another flute and clarinet duet because I had written so much that Leonard Garrison has an entire CD just of my flute and clarinet music. And they wanted me to write another piece about their dogs after that. And it took me a few years to even think about it. And that came out being for piccolo and bass clarinet, so that it really was a totally different texture. It wasn't like writing another piece for flute and clarinet.
I wonder if there's some kind of personality thing too, because I've had two roommates that were clarinet players, but I've never had a roommate that was a trumpet player. So maybe maybe that kind of fits in that kind of psychology of instruments too. Ruth,
When they practice, it's loud.
oh, there's that. Ruth, are you still here? Do you still have a question?
Yeah, I do. So I hadn't thought about this before because you said you wrote one piece first, the cantique. But did you envision when you put the compilation together somebody performing the entire Nocturnes?
Um, if I recall, oh, I don't have to recall. I have the book in front of me. I was going to say it says Nocturnes for the Nativity is a collection of settings intended as a resource book for Christmas services and concerts. By which I sort of meant don't treat it like a suite. It's not likely that anybody ever really would. I think people have recorded four and put them together on one YouTube, but it's functional music. It was the history for those of you who don't know it, it is I have a German flute friend who asked about 12 or 15 of her friends to write pieces for unaccompanied flute for her to play during Advent one year. And she was going to be putting together a compilation CD of all these pieces. She said, not original, like take your favorite Christmas hymn or something else equally appropriate and make your setting of it. And she had a bunch of composers, mostly German, um, make their settings of it. And so I did Cantique de Noël for that. And then the following year, over the summer, I started sending copies of Cantique de Noël because, all right, well, she asked me over the summer, I think it was 2016, and then she played it a few times in Germany for her Christmas performances. Then the next year, I started sending it to my friends who I knew would be playing in church the coming December. That got such enthusiasm that other people were saying, could you write a few more or make a whole book full of these? And I thought, it's hard to not be repetitive because we're talking about short melodies that tend to be 4 bars, 4 bars, 4 bars, 4 bars. And I want it to not be too abstract because it's functional Christmas music at the same time that it's sort of an artistic take. So I thought, I'll write another one. And I thought, I'll write another. And then I realized, okay, this is how my folk song suite started. That was originally going to be only one. And I had to be sort of cajoled into writing a few more. And so when I got to four, I thought, this is enough to have all of them in a book that's worth getting. Um, and I'm not writing a suite. People can pick which they want. In my opinion, they all have different difficulty levels from each other. Um, it, in some ways, everything is difficult to master, but the fingering, that playing Silent Night is easier than playing Midnight Clear. The demands of the ornamentation are different. And so hopefully this is a handy book for people to use as a resource, even though it's only 4 pieces. If somebody ever wanted to play all 4, I'm fine with that. But it was not intended that way, the way that a suite might be.
Thank you. I had a question about edition because you keep talking about these performance notes. So I have the Presser edition, and I've got like a paragraph of performance notes. That is
Mhm.
it. I
That's
don't.
it. Yeah, that's
Okay.
So Ruth, if you go to the Facebook page banner and click on that, and go to the Presser website with the link provided for the PDF download, Daniel has like a one-page write-up about this and some of the other things there too. So even if you already
Oh,
have
perfect.
purchased the book, which is great
But
if you
years
have,
ago.
yeah, even
So
if you've already got it, it might be worth going ahead and printing that 3-page off of the website that they provided for us.
okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Deborah's been trying to ask a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and so also we'll get to Deborah in a second. But those of you who are wanting a question, I can only see 4 people at one time. So look at the bottom of your screen where it has like the React thing, and you can like click the raise hand button or whatever. Uh, if you do one of those things, then it'll be easier for me to know that you have a question too. Okay, but Deborah.
As a teacher, and I just love your compositions. It's
Oh, thank
just
you.
wonderful. But I was wondering, the music, the compositions that are submitted to Theodore Presser, are you finding the quality, not as good or just different? Or how are you seeing the quality of these new compositions coming to your publishing company going?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm not even sure how to answer it because there are so many people out there, and a lot of people send arrangements and
Mhm.
transcriptions, and some send original music, and more people. I mean, I've been there 40 years, so the world has changed, and it used to be that going to a big publisher was pretty much the default and what everybody wanted. And that's really that pendulum has swung a lot.
Yeah.
And I think those who want to self-publish, it isn't about the quality of their music, it's about their attitude about independent entrepreneurship
Yes.
or working with a large partner and so on.
Mm.
Um, and so now there's many more options, and that's always changing. I know that's a cop out from not answering your question,
Can
but
I alter
yeah.
that, or can I add on to that question too?
Mhm.
Do you have
If you have time,
advice?
I'd like to ask some.
Do you have advice for those who are composing now or arranging now of what is accessible, what is popular, what sells, I guess, ultimately for those
Yeah.
who are submitting to Presser or self-publishing, so that way people want to play their music?
That's also really interesting because there are so many people out there who are flutists. And if you look at NFA as a microcosm, which is similar to what you might call our customer base is everybody who plays flute, right? So there are some who only want flute choir. There are some who only want serious recital works for their degree programs and auditions. There are some who want more introductory level or collections. And so, on one hand, getting the right music to the right customers, flutists, users, or whatever, is, I think, what it's all about. And that can have to do with what the publisher does to get it out there, extremely what the writer does to get it out there. We're not able to do as much as people would like. And that just gets harder over the years as far as sending people on the road and going to conventions a lot. The expense of doing that has to be offset by selling tons of copies. which is harder to do now. And I mean, that's the real answer to the other question about um, photocopies and PDFs rather than buying, is that makes it less possible for us to publish more pieces and promote them well and so on. Because if you ask Matt Johnston of I'll Read the same question, I'm sure you get a different answer, more or less, but probably along the same lines, which is your catalog will ideally match up with the people who are looking for what's in that catalog. And so Presser has tended to be more towards recital music, that we've got the new Lowell Lieberman concerto and all of the Lowell Lieberman music, and that's very difficult. I think that will be extremely popular among those who are able to play it or able to learn it or motivated to learn it. We have Amanda Harburg and Erica Wazen. I love being their publisher because that music, like mine, I think is somewhere in the middle. That it isn't only for extremely difficult or extremely modernistic, but it's artistic rather than being simplified, or it's for mature players artistically. But there are so many flutists and there are so many composers that it's hard to sort of say what's an average or a typical.
Thank you.
I think Innocent, did you have a question too?
Yes, I have a question. Sorry for joining this way. I'm joining on my phone because I've been busy since. So, Daniel, thank you so much. Is it Daniel, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. I was invited by my friend here to join you guys. So
And I know you from the internet too.
Oh, you know me from the internet. Yeah, I'm a PhD student of composition at the University of Iowa. So I'm really thinking about when people talk about originality or talk about trying to create something that it's you. What I see most times is that most composers actually do more of copying other people, and then they say that it is them. How do you guys really? What kind of publications do you guys look at for before you take them? Do you look at something? Do you look towards the most difficult or more kind of these scary pieces? Is this what you look at for them to pass for publication, or do you look at some simplicity or some aspect of actual originality? Because there are some people who I personally I write both ways. I write more complicated pieces and I also write simplified pieces, but then I try to make it come from me. Most times I don't like to go through people's works or what Prokofiev have written or something. I don't like to do that before I begin my composition, because if I do that, it's going to influence what I'm going to write. And unfortunately, people don't see that as being original. They don't see that as being real you. They see being real you meaning you have to pick from people, then you create something that represents you, which I'm conflicted in that regard. So my question is that what do you look at for before you accept publications?
So ultimately what the company looks for is what they think they'll be able to sell a bunch over time. Not necessarily immediately, or composers who they think they will have a career over time. And I love your question, because some publishers are looking for what will sell this year or in the next year or two, or what has already worked, and they're babies about it. They only want to do what's already done, like writing sequels. But we're a much more artistic company than that, and our successes and other companies, Schirmer and Boozy, companies like that, our successes come from finding individual composers who have their own voice and are true to themselves and are loving what they're doing, and it's the only thing they could do. And when people ask me, what should I write that you're looking for? I turn the question around and say, why do you want to be a composer? What is it that made you risk your entire life for such a crazy career? What drives you? What's the passion? Because that's what we're looking for. And it's very hard to quantify, But the composers who write based on what they just can't help but love writing, they're more true to their imagination and the brain engages differently. And the craziest different composers are the ones, what did Beethoven and Berlioz sound like to people back then? I remember when Steve Reich was like so underground, he didn't want anybody to hear his music because he was afraid that people would laugh at him. And he went to Cornell University about 10 years before I did. And there was a professor who had all of Steve Reich's music in a locked cabinet. And when that professor heard that I had heard some of his music on the radio and was real curious, I said, "Have you ever heard of him?" And he opens up the vault and I said, "This is so terrific. Why does he hide it?" And he said, he doesn't think the world is ready yet. And he was right. And like 10 years later now, by the 1980s, once Einstein on the Beach sort of broke the world into listening to, I mean, he and Glass were friends in school. The world then became ready for it. And it's so much true with so many different composers in different ways, whether it's more ethnic or more atonal or tonal or what instruments or different points of view. If it sounds familiar like what people already like, they don't need another composer writing the same thing. It's sort of true with popular music also. In popular music, I think because there's so much money that can be made that the record companies are sort of more terrible about wanting to play it safe. But we want to publish things that are artistic, but also that people can buy the sheet music for, which is tricky. There are some composers who write really fascinating music that can't really be performed by other people because if the composer is using their own skills, some uncommon skills, other people can't necessarily play that. I hope that was helpful, but the best advice is you know why you became a composer, and that's what you should do. And you will find your success when people find you who are looking for that. And nobody needs another Prokofiev, even though I love Prokofiev. And with some composers themselves, they have the problem. Like they've written 100 pieces, five of them are popular. If there's no point in rewriting copies of those same five because they're already out there.
That's a great question and a great answer.
Mhm.
And as somebody who premieres new music, or that was my performing career, and I do a lot of performances even still with young composers. And one of the things that I always say is like you've got to find the balance. There's an audience for it somewhere, but when it comes to publication, this is a union group, and we had 3 50-minute rehearsals on this piece, and we can't perform it well in 50 minutes, and so we're not going to buy it. So this is very academic. This is very hard, and or but there's other composers like, well, this is really easy, and it's just not that fun to play. And there is an audience for it somewhere, but as far as getting it published, it might be finding the right publisher that matches you and who are targeting that kind of audience too. Um, are there certain places that people should look as they are seeking to publish then, or just send it everywhere and see who takes?
You could send everywhere. There's no law against it. Um, I think that looking for publishers who do things that you feel you would fit into is more likely to get a yes letter than a no letter.
Mm-hmm.
People who submit handbell choir music to Presser clearly are not looking at what we publish because we don't publish handbell music. We did 50 years ago. Um, or people who send easy concert band music to us. I mean, that's a much more common field, but for easy concert band music, there are a lot of publishers who 100% do that and spend all of their marketing money only on easy concert band music, marketing that. And they're going to do a better job. And so Presser is stronger in flute music than anything else. And other than Alry, which is more of a specialist, but of the big general publishers, we're the only ones who go to NFA every year.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sort of snowballs. It wasn't like this when I first started, but gradually we started exhibiting at NFA just because it was big. We had our whole retail store there of all publishers. And I started to know customers, and customers started to know our catalog, and that led Jean Baxtresser to give us her book, and then Lowell wrote his sonata, and it snowballs. That led to us getting Gary Shocker, which led to more and more, and then more academic books. And then we got Mazzanti, and you know, we've got a book coming out in a few months that is, well, I'm not sure if this is, no, it's not a secret. The Langevin method, I think people have been talking that it's almost out. It's going to be out, I think, in March. But so because we specialize in that, and the people with these books, we're not the only good place to send it, but they know that we're going to take good care of the book. We're going to edit it carefully, and I'll be sort of, not ghostwriting, but coaching the writers on how to explain things. So do your research. If it's choral music that you're writing, talk to choral conductors and to ask who sends them complimentary copies or who sends them promotional stuff, because that's the best indicator of who's going to promote your work.
And I'm really
that's
glad
yeah.
Innocent joined this call today. We're actually, Solo of the Month will be featuring his new piece, Veil of Mists, in February of next year. So,
Oh, cool.
Our list of the next 6 months of music will be released, I think, probably by Monday. And so one of Innocent's pieces will be featured in February. So,
And you're one of the great flute schools. Are you a flutist also, Innocent?
No, I'm not a flautist. I'm not.
Yeah, but there's a great professor there who attracts a lot of really good graduate students, and yeah,
I've already talked to Nicole. Nicole
yeah.
Esposito is the flute professor at University of Iowa. I've already
Ah,
talked to her
really?
about this, and I'm hoping she's going to have all of her grad students, or potentially all of her studio, participate that month too. So,
Wow.
we're going to get your piece played a lot, Innocent.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Well, I'm curious to hear it. I'll be tuning in, but I'm not a flutist, so I can't learn it.
Are there we're kind of pushing time a little bit. Are there any other questions that the audience has for Daniel? And you might have to unmute yourself if you don't see where the hand button is. Looks like one got typed in. Where did you say? If you go to the Marianne, if you go to the Facebook page, Solo of the Month, just click the banner at the top of the page, and there's a link to Theater Presser's unique URL that goes to a download page. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands raised. I would just very much say thank you so much for being here with us. Oh, maybe a hand just got raised. Cheryl, good
Yeah,
night. Let's hear
Cheryl.
your question. And you'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you are.
Yeah.
Did you mean to raise your hand?
Yes, excuse me. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. Yes.
Do you have a question, Cheryl? You're on.
Yes, I did. My question was again, what was that origin again about Bambino, where it came from, an Italian
Oh,
song?
right. We were talking about that, and that's when Matt said, "Oh, I have to put on the record button." Okay, so I grew up in the 1960s listening to popular radio, and Drummer Boy was so big. And then after that, the same performing group, I don't remember the name, it was the Somebody Singers. Um, they did this melody that was called O Bambino, which is the words in the refrain of it. And they did it slow, just like Drummer Boy. It might have been the flip side, I don't know. And I always thought that was so beautiful and mystical, that recording of it that was done so slow with the drone in the bottom of that. And so I thought, that's a really nice melody. I'm going to use that. So I went and I found the authentic source, and it's a chant called Tu Scendi, spelled Scendi, Dalle Stelle, which I think that something about ascending to the stars, I don't recall.
So,
And
Los Scende della, what now?
Stelle. as in stars.
Della Stella.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so
And
is it
so
ascending to the stars or descending to the stars?
as I guess it would be ascending. Yeah.
Yeah, ascending
And
to the stars. Hmm.
right. And so I wrote it only ever having heard it in this version that was the popular single that did it slow like Drummer Boy. And to me, that was the correct way to do it. That's all I knew about this melody. And so I wrote this to be played that way.
Yeah.
And then a flute friend of mine, some of you know Carla Auld, she recorded it real quickly, like a tarantella. And I was sort of embarrassed to say, like, why did you do that? It doesn't sound right. And she said, "You're kidding. You don't know Tiscendi della Stella? My grandmother used to sing this to me all the time." That side of her family is from Italy, and it's very popular there as an upbeat, fast kind of hymn. And to her, what the Americans know sounded funny. And that, so what I did was very inauthentic. And it was surprising to hear the way that it more traditionally is done faster. So her version is the only correct one, rather than the way that I wrote it. If correct, but again, if correct means authentic, which it doesn't have to mean. You know, Joe Cocker's Little Help from My Friends, a lot of people like better than the way the Beatles did it. He did it so much slower at a different tempo, and it's terrific. So, similar to what I was saying before, that if you pick up a book of music from the 19th century and it's a practical duet book or a study book, you play it the way that you want to. And if you're playing in a flute quartet or a wind quintet and you have a gig and you're looking for repertoire, you're going to play one movement if you want to, or not take the repeats, or, if you want to. And living composers who are, I don't want to say smart, because there's some word practical or open-eyed, know that this is what musicians do. I mean, I've been in ensembles where that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to play one movement of the Haydn Wind Quintet because we don't have time to do the whole 20-minute piece. So it doesn't bother me when people play one movement of my wind quintet. I'm glad they're doing it. This is what musicians do. I mean, there's a certain idealism and pragmatism always at the same time. We're writing for people.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
So again, the original song is called La Scenda della Stella.
Now, the first word is two, spelled T-U.
Okay.
Which I guess that's
in the chat. I put it in the chat. If you look at the chat.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a Wikipedia link. And if you aren't able to get that, Cheryl, just let me know and I'll send it to you again.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here and meeting our great friend to the flute community, Daniel Dorff. We sure appreciate you you and Presser sharing this movement with us for this month and Solo of the Month. The Nocturne on It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. I'm having fun playing it. I just performed it today. I'm loving it. And the whole collection is great. If you are only currently working on this one piece, check out the other three. They're really fun. So there's the Nocturne on Silent Night, the Nocturne on O Bambino, or as they were just talking, to Cendi dalla Stella, and then also Nocturne on Cantique de Noël. Great. All of it is great. Daniel has so much other great music that is available for flute. And
the downloaded PDF has a listing of all that. And also my website does, which is just danieldorff.com. There's a link for flute.
The email that went out to invite you all to this Zoom chat, it went to about 350 of you flute players. That has a direct link to Daniel's music that is available through Flute World. Just with a reminder that at Flute World, you can get 10% off all sheet music and accessories with the code Allison 2025. So while it's 2025, go ahead and stock up on your Daniel Dorff music. Just click add all to cart. Because there's not a piece of his that I've heard or played that I haven't really enjoyed. So Daniel, even though you're not a flute player, you're one of us. We're so glad you're here, and we're so grateful that you were writing great music for us.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone who attended and everyone who's watching the video later, and Flute World for sponsoring this.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Glad to meet
and
you
I can't wait to hear Innocent's piece next month.